Marchand to DeBrusque. Pasternak scores!
Season.
Trent Frederick has a breakaway and he scores! Carlos Marchand scores! Max Domi and Charlie McAvoy are gonna go. Some message sending from both teams. 4-1, twice in 4 days.
Oh, I've seen this movie before many times. It's a classic. Very rarely do you see a regular season game elicit this kind of emotion from both the players and the fans. But this game was a sneak peek of the playoffs, with these two teams likely to meet in the first round. And when you have one team who's trying to change their identity against a foe who's constantly exposed them for seemingly being too soft, you end up getting pure fireworks. It's no secret, Boston has completely and utterly ran the Leafs show for years. For example, if I ask you to remember the series where the Leafs lost in 7 games to Boston, you would literally have to ask me which one, because there have been several in the last decade. This week, the Leafs lost 2 games to the Bruins, both by the score of 4-1. You truly can't make this stuff up. And although everything gets wiped clean when the playoffs start, these games are a good indicator of how this series may go physically, strategically, and mentally. Let's start with the physicality of the game, since it's what jumps out first to the eye. The knock on the Leafs has forever been that they are just too soft, but with the pieces that they have added, Toronto is extremely aware of this issue. Right away, we saw Jake McCabe give 2 all-time cross-checks to the face of Brad Marchand and Jake DeBrusque. Sadly, I can't show this because YouTube wants to protect your delicate eyes against violence, but these had some purpose behind them. These cross-checks set the tone, and it also landed McCabe right in the penalty box. Now, the refs screwed up by giving both Nyes and McCabe a penalty instead of just McCabe, and that would result in a 5-on-3 that would lead to a goal. The goal was assisted by, of course, Marchand and DeBrusque, and Marchand felt the need to point to the Leafs bench after the goal. That's a little sneak peek of the mental warfare between these two teams. Then you have the Bruins' physicality in all 3 zones against the Leafs that allows them to be so difficult to play against. This is where I feel the Leafs get beat quite frequently by Boston. There's certain teams that as a player, you know you're going to get punished. As a top Leaf player, you know that the Bruins are going to take a piece of you and it's going to hinder your decision making. The Bruins run a 1-2-2 forecheck, and F1 is always making sure that they finish their check. Coach Jim Montgomery spoke afterwards of just how important their physicality was early on, and it set the tone for the game. Even when Boston had sustained pressure and Toronto tried desperately to get it out, every Boston player finished their check and made it hard minutes for the Leaf defenders. This has been a staple of the Bruins game for years, but the real difference is on defense and how hard they make life on the Leafs' top players. There were times in this game where the Leafs had some sustained pressure, but Boston just kept them neatly to the perimeter. Since the Leafs are a high possession team, the Bruins play man defense, and look at how aggressive each player is to their check. As soon as the Leaf touches the puck, they're instantly met with pressure and little space for you to make a play. Really, this is brilliant defending by Boston, but this has been the knock on the Leaf core for years. Getting on the inside in these tight checking games and making a play in the dirty areas of the ice. With Toronto wanting to have their skilled players up high to attack downhill, Boston's aggressiveness with man-on-man coverage eliminates that space that Toronto Stars usually get when they play against zone coverages. This forces the Stars to try and do too much, and good things end up happening for Boston. In both games against the Bruins, the Leafs' core consisting of Nylander, Matthews, Marner, and Tavares were largely kept to the outside of the danger areas when 5-on-5. It needs to be that way too for Boston, because if they do get clean looks, they will make you pay. Another area where Boston exposed Toronto in these 2 games is off the rush. A bit too passive at the blue line for the Leafs, and multiple times an entry followed by a stop-up had Boston finding the trailer and getting pucks on net to score a goal. That will be something that both teams will note heading into the playoffs, as the Leafs will look to be more aggressive in the neutral zone, while Boston will look to use their speed to force Toronto's rangy defensemen to back off and give them space. Back to the physical part of the game, the Leafs role players stepped up and showed pushback where Toronto typically hasn't in the past. Bertuzzi fed so many lefts to Wotherspoon that he was begging for a right, and Domi got in the mix as well. And while that is the response that you're looking for as a Leaf fan, the Leafs still lost this game. Regardless, Toronto was firm on sending a message. Max Domi said post-game that the team had made a pact in the locker room that they were going to stick together. In Toronto, everything is broken down to the comma in the media, but do you think the Boston Bruins make the same pact every season? Or is it simply a non-negotiable that doesn't even need to be said? As a fan of either team, take all this with a grain of salt. Toronto is coming off a back-to-back with the flu bug riding through the locker room, and the Bruins have their own choking sins to worry about from last year. But both strategically and mentally, this matchup is absolutely fascinating. The Bruins will impose their physicality against Toronto, and if they do it in a strategic way like we've seen in the past 2 games this week, it'll be extremely tough for the Leafs to generate any offense. As for Toronto, their management is clearly sick of being called soft, and all of their moves and role players will try to match that physicality. They may not be a soft team to play against with the additions, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are a better team. The difference will ultimately come down to the Leafs' top players, and if they can create offense despite that physicality, and even maybe show some of their own pushback in the process. One thing is for certain, and it's that if this series does happen, it will be an all-out war. Boston may have swept the regular season series, but they know better than anyone that the playoffs are a different animal. With that being said, everyone has seen this movie before, and to expect otherwise may just be wishful thinking.